You are now listening to the Artsindy Crossroads show. Here's
Will Sasso stars for Mad TV and another series coming out on CBS.
Your intro there sounded like I was just making my way down to the ring for a MMA fight.
interviews with Ruth Moody, the Wailing Jennies,
You're so welcome. Take care.
Karen LeBlanc, the star of Nurse, the fighter boy.
Hi, Nick. I'm really good, and thank you for asking
People in film, theater, music, the arts.
I like your Instagram style because it's casual, and it's real, it's down to earth, and it suits Hastings Street right here, right now.
A good early evening to everyone here in the Valley. You're listening to Civil Radio 101.7 FM, broadcasting to the Fraser Valley from the UFV Abbotsford campus on the traditional and unceded territory of the Stolo people.
Listeners, right now we are on the line, and we have this pleasure, this opportunity, very lucky to get this interview with local legend, skateboarding pioneer, has won many championships, Kevin Harris. Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview, and Kevin's also involved with organizing the event that happens every year at the Cloverdale Rodeo skateboarding event, and involved with the 2020 Olympics coming up, and we'll talk about that again in the near future. Not too long ago, Kevin competed in the WFSA World Freestyling Skateboard Championships in 2007. Has won awards, going back to the 80s. Actually, in the 70s, you won an award, right?
Yeah. Basically, when I started skating at 13, there was a lot of local contests through just in Vancouver and throughout Canada. And there was quite a contest circuit back from in the late 70s through all the, believe it or not, through all the Super Value stores throughout Canada. And I was from Richmond, and I had to win the Richmonds to get into the provincials, and you had to win the provincials to get into the nationals. And every year the Canadian Nationals through the late 70s was held at the Pacific Coliseum. So they were big events because skating was, booming at the time. That's when it first, came into Canada, and of course Vancouver was a hot spot for skateboarding. So, started out being kind of one of the best in Richmond, and then eventually the best in Canada for a bunch of years running. And then what you do later, as you get as an amateur and you're the best in the country, then the next step is to turn pro. So I was very fortunate and very lucky enough to turn pro and ride for the best skateboard company in the world, the Bones Brigade. So traveled the world with guys like Tony Hawk, Steve Caballero, McGill, Mike Riley, Rodney Mullen, you name it. So I was privileged to ride for that, and had an amazing career as a professional skateboarder.
One of the records that Kevin set is a world record for two-board Daffy 360s to rotate almost 400 times.
I can comment on that. It is, back in those late 70s years when skateboarding was, pioneered and just starting, one of the tricks that was done, unlike skateboarding today, is, way more about the ollie and how many sets of stairs you can do and railing lengths and stuff. Back then, those things didn't exist. So it was how many times you could spin around in a circle determined, how good of a skateboarder you were. So there was single board 360. So the more you could do, that was like measuring gauge for how good of a skateboarder you were. So there was another trick, and back then, of course, no YouTube, no internet, no nothing. So all we had to go on was buy skateboard magazines, and of course, the mecca was California. The magazines would come out of. So one of the world's records that was done was set by a guy in California named Steve Cathy, a professional skater, that had done, I think the record was 180 or something at the time. And of course, I'm reading about that up in Vancouver, going, holy crap! And I practiced forever, for months and months, years and years to start. And in my basement, I was beating that record. I was doing 220, 230, but you couldn't push the send button on YouTube at that point and get it out to the world. So, again, very fortunate in 1979 to go to the Pacific Coliseum and have a contest there and have a shot at trying to break a Guinness Book of World Records. So I had all Guinness there, and I had thousands of people in the audience cheering me on. And my personal best at that point was 230ish, and the world record was like 180. And I ended up spinning for 15 minutes straight. And why that happened was because the crowd really got behind me when I was pushing about 300. And the announcer said, "Hey, he's just cleared 300. How many do you want to see this guy do?" And the whole crowd started erupting and stomping their feet, going, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. So I just kept going. So I still hold the Guinness Book of World Records today at 1,032 consecutive revolutions on two boards. And so that's how that went down. But it was quite an honor to be in the Coliseum and have that kind of fan base and doing that trick and setting a Guinness Book of World Records.
You've been called one of the most natural skaters, exceptional footwork, and listeners can see your clip on YouTube. One of your clips from 1986. Yeah, you're skateboarding to AC/DC. When you started, you used a banana board, right?
Yeah. So when skateboarding first came into this country, it was there was, believe it or not, there was a demonstration team sponsored by Dairy Queen, and they brought up professional skateboarders from California, where the birth of skateboarding was, and they started touring the Dairy Queens through Canada, and that's what got me into it. Was holy crap, was the skateboarding at Dairy Queen. So I went to see the demo. I watched some of the big names at the time do a show. So at 13 years old, I was like, oh my God, you got to go get a skateboard now. I was so stoked on skateboards, but you're learning the culture, and you're learning this so-called fad at the time on where to even buy a skateboard. So what do? You get your parents to drive you to a sporting goods store. So you go to the sporting goods store, and the only boards that those guys sold at the time was a plastic, piece of garbage, $25 banana board, and that's what we bought, and all my friends bought. And then once you kind of get into it, you start learning, oh, there's a skateboard magazine. Oh, there's a skateboard shop in Vancouver. And then you start getting the specialty stuff. But most kids that got into skateboarding when it really hit hard in 1975, 76, just were started on a banana board. But, you soon know that there's a better product than going to a sports store and buying a $25 banana board, right?
In high school, yeah, you sacrificed a lot when you were a teenager. You weren't into any much else, but you liked skating.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of other sports, and by the time I turned 13, I was introduced to skating because in 1975, skateboarding kind of came to Vancouver for the first time. And once I stood on a skateboard, it was over. Everything else I stopped doing. I just completely fell in love with it and skated as much as I could every single day. So, it was one of those magic moments where it's just like everything was just focused on trying to do as best I could on a skateboard.
What was the culture like back then? You were drawn to it at 13 and, like in high school and everything. I guess it really started to take off. Skateboarding came around in the 50s. It actually started from the surfer culture, right? In the off season, they still wanted to surf. So. Yeah,
correct. I mean, it started on, through the 50s and 60s when the first manufacturing boards came up, but they were metal wheels, and they were just like a pile of garbage. They really even hard to push, but that's what started. And it wasn't until the birth of the urethane wheel in 1973 where it really, really took off, because now you could turn without falling. You could ride an empty swimming pool. And then that's when the whole vertical thing started happening in the mid-70s, where they're starting to ride empty swimming pools before skateboard parks were built. And when you think about it, that was the birth of every extreme sport on the planet. And it was guys jumping fences and finding drained swimming pools in Southern California, started to skate them. They produced a magazine called Skateboarder Magazine that went out throughout the world. So if you went in Southern California, you were just trying to find a friggin' empty swimming pool to ride. So before the skateboard park started getting built, that's what everybody was going for. Was let's find an empty swimming pool. Let's find an empty swimming pool. Then the skateboard parks really started to really kick in by 77, 78, 79, and they're popping up everywhere. And then it turned into something that you could actually go to some location and pay to skate. But the culture in most places around the world, and the culture in Vancouver, was if you were skating, there was different areas to go in Vancouver that all the skateboarders would show up. So you'd go there, and there'd be 40, 50, 60 guys on skateboards, all roughly the same age, all in their teenage years, because we didn't even understand at that point. To me, somebody who was 25, you just wouldn't think of them on a skateboard because we were all teenagers, and we didn't know where you would stop that. Is this something that you're going to stop at 19 years old or what? But we also had guys to look up to, the Tony Elvis and Stacy Probst that were older than us. And we look at the skateboarding now, there's still guys that just tear it in their 50s and 60s still. So, of course, it's like any other thing you get involved in. You usually try to do it for your life, and this it's such a major part of your life that you try to do it as long as you can.
Kevin, can you talk about the different genres? Like you do freestyle. Freestyle is like a lot of footwork and actually performing with music most of the time or all the time. And is the other genres of skateboarding kind of phased out?
No. So back when skateboarding started, there wasn't really there was different disciplines of the sport. So there was slalom, going through cones. There was freestyle skating, and there was vert skating. What Tony Hawk would be on a big ramp. Those were the only the three aspects that exist. And so when everybody got into skating, in the 70s, you did it all. It wasn't like you specifically went after one thing. So I was competing in vert all the way through the 70s. I was competing in slalom. I was competing in freestyle. So when the 80s started kicking in and skateboarding was really starting to explode as far as the difficulty of tricks, especially by the mid-80s, I started focusing just way more on freestyle. And a lot of reasons is because of my environment. In Vancouver, we had some vert ramps, but they were outside, so you couldn't skate on most of the time in the winter. So what I could do, though, is skate undercover and skate flatland. So I started getting better at freestyle than I did at anything else, which made me, when I did go to Southern California and compete where all the major contests were in the early 80s and the mid-80s, that was what I specialized in, and I got stronger in that. And as I started competing and doing well in freestyle, that's where I put all my focus. And at that point, I had to pick one discipline, and that happened to be it. And then, another really crazy thing about where freestyle was, it was huge in the 80s, but when street skating came in the late 80s, early 90s, it basically freestyle was over. And it didn't really start coming back again until, people still did it, but it was so small in the scheme of things because street skating was so friggin' popular. Freestyle, it's just kind of starting to come back, say, in the last decade, better than it has in a long time.
Street skating, in your opinion, is it kind of dangerous if it...
Yeah, for sure. Freestyle is the more the artistic, side of skateboarding. Streets, out of every 100 skateboarders out there, 98% of them are going to be street skaters. One guy's going to be a vert skater, and maybe one guy's going to be a freestyler. But that's kind of like street skating by far is the biggest genre of skateboarding. And but freestyle, what's crazy to me is, but the YouTube, the hits are mostly freestyle skaters, because freestyle, anybody in you don't have to be a skater to watch freestyle skateboarding and enjoy it, where street skating, you kind of have to have more of that skateboard background to be watching videos and stuff. So when a freestyle video comes up, it's general population that would watch it more than the skateboarding going to watch it.
I guess over the years from when you started, obviously you have your own board. Do you start to get creative, like trying to find innovative ways to make it better? Like
make the board better?
Yeah.
Skateboarding's kind of been, for a very, very long time, is basically your 7-ply rock hard maple decks. The shapes have been fairly consistent over the decades. There is companies like Powell Peralta that's doing and trying different ways to make a board lighter, stiffer, stronger, more pop in it, and they've succeeded in that. So, but for the longest time, a board's been basically a 7-ply rock hard maple board, and it's been roughly from 7 to 8.5 inches wide and 30 inches long for quite some time.
Within pop culture, you've seen a lot of different phases of skateboarding. So, like when you were a teenager, like you got sponsored early. Like that must have been huge for you when you got your first sponsor.
Oh, it's huge. Like, I got to look back at my career, and not once did I ever skateboard because I thought I was going to make money, or I never skateboarded because I thought I was going to get free product. All those things just started coming to me as I got better. So, I'm 56 now, and of course, you remember times when your kids are born and all that kind of stuff. But, another big moments to me were when Stacy Peralta, who was one of the owners of Powell Peralta, who had all the biggest names on the planet, Tony Hawk, the world's Steve Caballero, came to me and asked me to ride for that team. It was just like, I remember exactly where he was. I remember exactly how the air temperature felt, everything, because it was just like, first of all, I idolized Stacy Peralta, and for him to ask me to ride for the best team on the planet was quite an honor. And I look back in those times now going, it was an amazing career that I had, and I'm still skating now, still totally involved in the industry. But I was given this gift of trying to be a good skateboarder, and people recognize it, including guys like Stacy Peralta, and riding for that team was something totally special that I'll never forget.
And of course, you were born with natural talent, but you worked hard, like practiced. You stayed active as a performer and getting involved with the community. You've built a few skating rinks, skating parks. Of one of the events you've put on, there's the yearly event at the Cloverdale Rodeo. And if you don't mind me asking, it's actually doing very well. Was it kind of a bold move, seen as a bold move initially to suggest putting on a skateboard competition at the Cloverdale Rodeo?
Yeah, no, good question, because I've always tried to give back to the sport that's been so special to me. So in Canada, we were the very first skateboard distribution network in Canada. We were the very first skateboard magazine in Canada. We opened up the very first indoor skateboard park in Canada. So we've done a lot. Our families can contribute back to skateboarding. Now, the rodeo, again, kind of going back to my point on freestyle being so small in our industry, it's 0.001% of the population are freestyle skateboarders, but there's also really good freestyle skateboarders in 30 or 40 different countries. So it's on a worldwide thing. And the reason for that is you can get good at freestyle. All you need is a flat surface. So, but freestyle's really not something that the skateboard industry likes to get behind. So it's nearly impossible for all these years in the last decade to hold a freestyle contest at a skateboard contest, if that makes sense. So you can't go to a Vans Gold Cup Series where the crowd of skateboarders watching all these deep pools and all these crazy tricks that they're doing. Freestyle's not going to work there. But freestyle works extremely well at mom and dad with 8 and 10-year-old kids at the fair, because we kind of are, I've always said this, we're kind of the jugglers on the street corner. The minute a freestyle skateboarder grabs the board, he instantly gathers a crowd, because anybody can watch it and anybody can enjoy it. Kind of like, what maybe figure skating would be similar. So the Cloverdale Rodeo, getting 75,000 people through on the weekend, we felt that was a perfect venue spot to start our world competitions there. So since I come from that freestyle background, we knew all the best freestylers on the planet. So we started inviting these guys 8 years ago to this event, and every year it gets bigger and bigger. And we usually have between 17 and 20 countries represented. And we truly do run the world's best freestyle contest as far as the participation. We've got all the best guys on the planet. So, and the Cloverdale Rodeo loves us being there because we're an entertainment for the people that are walking around. So, honestly, in our bleachers, the people watching the event, there's rarely any skateboarders. It sounds kind of weird, but I do all the announcing and help with organizing the event. And when I look at the crowd, I don't want to see skateboarders in the crowd, because skateboarders we already have doing the sport. I want to be able to show families and kids that there's another way to get into it instead of going to a skateboard park, learn on the flat, get good enough, and then go to a skateboard park. That's how it should be. But our industry doesn't handle that very well. Mom and Dad buy Johnny for his birthday a skateboard at 8 years old. have no infrastructure to go to get that kid lessons. So what they do is like, oh, let's go to the skateboard park down the road. Well, I've always looked at that as far as it's like your kid wants to play hockey and you put skates on them and put them right into a game. It's the same type of philosophy where that kid needs to go like, well, mom and dad can pull up the minivan out of the garage and I can get used to the sport on the flat and learn how to turn it and do some tricks and then go to a skateboard park. And that's what we try to portray at that event.
Oh, wow. Oh, sorry, I'm just kind of thinking about that. Because for some people, for some kids, kind of would be a deterrent to someone like, well, I got to go to a skateboard park. I don't know how to skate, but maybe I can practice some of the freestyle stuff first.
Yeah, and that's what happens, right? Because a kid gets totally intimidated at that age going to a skateboard park, and these guys are, 15, 16, 18, 21-year-old guys ripping, and how do you even figure out how the lines of a skateboard park and how to drop in and how to do all this? And that's why, another reason scootering is so popular at a skateboard park, because it's easy for the kid and he can start going down little transitions, get used to it right away. And my whole thing with skateboarding is I'd really like that kid to, learn on the flat first and have a little bit of education before he goes. Same thing, again, go back to hockey. You're not going to put the kid into a game. You're going to put the skates on. You're going to get him a stick. You're going to get him on the ice with hardly anybody else around and learn how to stick handle on the puck and then put him into a game. And then, so I look at skateboarding as the same. That should be done the same way. No, I mean, I think the Olympics is going to be for 2020. It's going to, help skateboarding. And, behind the scenes, I'm on the Olympic board of directors for Canada. And it's weird how the government's always looked at skateboarding. It's under their leisure activities. So the government's never looked at skateboarding as a sport, as a leisure activity. So the minute it gets connected to the Olympics, the funding starts to happen. So the thing that I'm excited about going forward is, I kept referencing hockey, but skateboarding will kind of turn into that hockey. And the reason I mention that is because now community centers will have level 1, 2, 3 coaching, eventually down the road. Because why? Because the government, of course, wants to put that money in for the athletes to make sure that Canada's represented at the Olympics really well. And another thing Canada has going for it is we have produced over the last 40 years some of the best skateboarders on the planet. So we are already in what's called Own the Podium, where you can actually, say as a Canadian, there's guys who can make a medal and can do, to make sure that they can get on and have a chance to win an Olympic medal because we do produce some of the greatest skateboarders on the planet. So that helps with funding for these type of things because we do make those top 10. There's usually one Canadian in those top 10 at the big events, right? So it's not like, another sport where we don't stand a chance. We stand a chance of getting a medal in the sport of skateboarding in 2020. So,
listeners, we've had this opportunity of speaking to local skateboard legend Kevin Harris, who still holds the record in freestyle skateboarding in the Guinness Book, has competed in many competitions, sponsoring events, has opened up various skate parks, and going to be organizes the Cloverdale freestyle skateboarding competition, and is working on the behind the scenes for the skateboarding that will freestyle skateboard. Is it for the Olympics? It'll be the different genres, right?
Correct. For the Olympics, it's going to be park skating and street skating. So that's the two genres going into the Summer Olympics in Tokyo.
And we'll be involved with the Olympics for skateboarding. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
No, thanks a lot, Nick. That was great. Thank you so much.
Listeners, right now we are on the line with author Kim Hudson, who has a workshop, Awakening the Virgin Archetype at Biz Books. Workshop will be taking place from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Yeah, and a new book out, The Virgin's Promise. How are you doing? And thanks for taking the time to do this interview.
Oh, well, thank you. It's
nice to be invited.
Yes, I was wondering if you can delve into first year workshop. It's going to be you mentioned the dates, and it's going to talk about this whole genre that you also explore in your book.
That's right. It's a new idea about a feminine alternative to the hero's journey, and it's a structure that has 13 beats that walks you through how to write a story that takes a person's inner talent or their dream and brings it to life against the wishes of their community. So it includes stories like An Education or Rocky or Shakespeare in Love, any story where somebody has a dream or a talent that they need to bring to the world.
Part of your inspiration for this is was first reading about or hearing about Joseph Campbell's interpretation of the masculine counterpart, the hero's journey, and then from there, this inspired you to delve further into the feminist counterpart.
Yes, that's correct. I was at Vancouver Film School, and on my very first day, they had a psychologist come in and explain to us, introduce the hero's journey. And I'd never heard of it before, and it instantly really struck me. It felt really familiar, and I felt very attached to it. It was so it's basically the idea the hero lives in an ordinary world, and he gets called to adventure, and he refuses the call, and then he crosses the threshold and meets the mentor, and then there's tests, and he meets allies and enemies, and it sort of carries along. It's the story in The Matrix or Star Wars. Actually, Joseph Campbell was hired to be a consultant for Star Wars, and that movie just hammers you over the head with these beats, and they're really, really powerful for that type of story. But the next thing that we were told was that all story from all time is this hero's journey. And I remember sitting in class and thinking, well, that can't be right. My very first day in film school. And I just set out. It took me about 5 years to figure out what would be the feminine counterpart to that hero's journey. And I came up with 13 beats for that journey.
Before we delve further into this genre and how it can apply to men as well as women, why was your conviction so strong? Does it go back to where you grew up, or in what setting, and what you witnessed? Are your experiences that you had this strong conviction to
Yes,
develop this?
Definitely. I think I was predisposed to it all my life. I grew up in the Yukon with lots of great opportunities to be very physical and out in the world, and it was in the 70s, so lots of trying to break boundaries for women, and I became a geologist and a hockey player and all those great things, and I started to, although I actually felt it to be a real privilege to be included in that masculine world, I recognized that there was a part of me that just wasn't having any expression, and it started to really bother me. And I was a land claims worker, and then I got married, and I had 2 daughters, which was an amazing gift, and started to, just the act of being a mother brought out a lot of feminine things in me and made me curious about what is a feminine quality.